Hi, I'm Edward, your co-host here on Dansplain.
And I'm Lily, the other half in this equation. Let's dive in. Okay, today we're getting into a really high-stakes geopolitical situation. It's a strategy some are calling the elephant's gambit. We're talking about India's pretty assertive strategic response to China's rising power.
All right, it feels like a real shift. For years, it was more like cautious rivalry, maybe?
Exactly. But our sources are showing that by, well, now, October 2025, New Delhi's clearly moved towards a more aggressive multi-alignment.
And it's not just talk, is it? It seems quite comprehensive.
No, it's definitely a whole-of-government pivot. Very deliberate.
Yeah, what strikes me is how structured it seems. The sources point to, like, three main pillars.
That's right. Economic ambition first, then a major military fortification effort, and finally some very, very nuanced diplomatic maneuvering.
And the big question we really need to explore for you, the listener, is, well, can India actually pull this off? Are they equipped to balance China?
Or is this path just maybe too risky, too precarious, given their own internal issues, dependencies?
Precisely.
Okay, so let's start where the sources say the vulnerability really lies, the economy. The dependence on Beijing looks, frankly, immense.
Oh, it's huge. And that trade deficit figure really jumps out.
It's staggering. Our analysis puts it at $99.2 billion for the 2024-25 fiscal year alone.
Wow. And that's not just about money flowing out, right? It signals something deeper.
Explain that. What does that deficit tell us?
Well, it's not just raw materials. It means India's importing a ton of finished high-value stuff, electronics, heavy machinery, even critical pharmaceutical ingredients, API.
So they're essentially funding the very rival they're trying to counter.
Pretty much, yeah, which makes that economic pillar of their strategy absolutely crucial.
Right. So how are they tackling this? What's the plan?
Well, the core idea is boosting manufacturing self-reliance, reducing that import dependency.
This is the Make in India initiative we hear about.
Exactly. And specifically, it's being pushed hard with these production-linked incentive schemes, the PLI schemes.
Okay. What do those do?
They're basically big financial incentives to lure global manufacturers. The goal is to cut reliance on those high-value Chinese imports, especially in really key areas.
Like electronics.
Electronics, definitely. And rare earth minerals, too. Things they see as critical vulnerabilities.
Makes sense domestically. But I imagine Beijing isn't just sitting back and watching this happen.
No, not at all. Our sources mentioned multiple WTO complaints already lodged by Beijing against these incentives. They see them as protectionist.
So India is walking a tightrope there, trying to reform internally while navigating global trade rules.
Which leads us right into the complexity of it all. This idea of pragmatic engagement.
This is where it gets really interesting because the signals seem mixed, don't they?
How so?
Well, after the Galwan clash in 2020, India cracked down, right? Restricted Chinese apps, blocked some investments.
Very publicly.
But more recently, we're seeing an easing. Things like restoring business visas for Chinese executives, resuming direct flights. Isn't that confusing for allies, like in the West?
It certainly raises eyebrows in places like Washington, sure. But the sources argue this isn't about concession. It's pure realpolitik.
Pragmatism driven by domestic needs.
Exactly. It's aimed squarely at boosting their own manufacturing base. India is using its massive consumer market as a lever.
Okay, unpack that leverage. How does letting companies like Vivo or Xiaomi expand operations actually help New Delhi's strategy?
Well, India is essentially telling these Chinese companies, look, you want access to our huge growing market.
Which they absolutely do.
Right. And you need to build here. You need to employ our people. And crucially, you need to share some of your tech with our local partners.
So it's about jobs and technology transfer. That's the immediate win, even if the overall dependency number stays high for a while.
That seems to be the calculation. Except some short-term dependence for long-term manufacturing strength. Treat market access as a strategic chip.
Okay, so that's the internal economic play. What about countering China's influence geographically, like the Belt and Road Initiative?
Yeah, they're actively working on diversifying supply chains and building infrastructure that bypasses China's chokeholds.
How?
They're strengthening platforms like BIMSTEC, that's the Bay of Bengal Group, and BBI, which focuses on road and rail links between Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, and Nepal.
And this ties into their Act East policy?
Definitely. It's all part of that sustained push. Projects like the Caladan multimodal transit transport are key here.
What does that specific project do?
It's designed to improve connectivity to Southeast Asia, linking India through Myanmar and potentially beyond. It's an economic countermove to Belt and Road.
Creating alternative trade routes, basically.
Alternative routes, alternative markets, offsetting China's regional clout through physical presence and options.
Okay, let's connect that economic ambition to the social side. Sources often highlight India's big advantage over an aging China. The youth bulge, that huge population dividend.
Right, it's often framed as their biggest leverage. But it's also, as you hinted earlier, a major risk.
A double-edged sword.
Absolutely. Theoretically, this massive young population should power growth for decades, unlike China's aging workforce.
What?
But if they don't achieve that manufacturing scale up quickly, and if they don't nail the skill development piece, that youth bulge could become a massive social and political problem. Think high unemployment among unskilled youth.
So the economic challenges we just discussed could actually feed into a social crisis.
They're directly linked. It puts immense pressure on the government to deliver those manufacturing jobs.
Which perhaps explains the political climate. Our sources note rising Indian nationalism and a public perception that increasingly sees Beijing as a threat.
Yes, and that gives Prime Minister Modi the political backing he needs for these assertive and, frankly, expensive policies. There's public demand for a strong stance against China.
That demand definitely surged after the Galwan clash in 2020. Which brings us to that second pillar, military fortification.
A huge shift post-Galwan. The sources point to really aggressive modernization.
Yeah, the figure mentioned is 4.6 lakh crore invested just in indigenization and infrastructure. That's enormous.
It is. And notice the link. That investment in indigenization isn't just about defense. It's explicitly meant to create high-value manufacturing jobs domestically.
Circling back to managing that youth bulge risk, hard security linked with economic policy.
Precisely. It's all interconnected.
So what specific hard power capabilities stand out? What shows India is serious about countering China's military edge in the region?
Well, a couple of things. First, acquiring top-tier systems like the S-400 missile defense from Russia. And apparently they're already eyeing potential upgrades to the S-500.
Interesting they stick with Russia for that, given the potential friction with the U.S. and the West, especially within the QUAD.
That really highlights the strategic autonomy piece, doesn't it? The sources suggest India sees these high-end defense capabilities as non-negotiable. They prioritize what they see as immediate defense needs, even if it causes some diplomatic headaches.
Basically telling Washington, we'll decide what we need.
Seems like it. The second point is showcasing their own tech, trying to demonstrate superiority over Chinese-supplied weapons used by rivals in the region, like maybe referencing past conflicts or exercises.
Right. Meanwhile, China keeps advancing too, arming neighbors like Pakistan with things like the J-35 stealth fighters. How does India counter that specific threat?
That's a major challenge for their air power doctrine. How do you counter stealth? The sources suggest a two-pronged approach.
Okay.
One, speed up their own domestic stealth fighter program, the AMCA, the Advanced Medium Combat Aircraft. Two, find immediate solutions, things like better AWACS, airborne warning systems, and advanced missiles to neutralize that J-35 threat right now.
So a long-term domestic solution and short-term procurements. Makes sense. And they're not just focused on land and air, right? What about the maritime domain? China's string of pearls.
They're actively countering that too.
Yeah.
We're seeing increased Indian naval presence, more surveillance activities, even extending into contested areas like the South China Sea.
Projecting power beyond their immediate waters.
Exactly. And potentially through arms sales. The BrahMos missile system is often mentioned maybe selling to countries like the Philippines or Vietnam.
Which would be a direct counter to China's influence in Southeast Asia.
A very direct signal, yes. Asserting India's role as a regional security partner.
And back on the land border, the LAC, the line of actual control, it's heavily fortified now.
Massively. We're talking BSF, ITBP troops, plus infrastructure like electrified rails. It's a hardened border.
Yet there's that strange detail the sources mention. Despite all this tension, these deep disputes, they still do things like the Diwali sweet exchanges between commanders.
It's such a perfect illustration of the paradox, isn't it? Highly advanced defenses, soldiers on high alert right next to these almost routine, cordial exchanges.
Managing tensions, perhaps, avoiding accidental escalation.
It captures that tightrope walk, prepare for conflict, but do everything possible to avoid starting one accidentally. Keep lines of communication open, even if it's just symbolic gestures.
Okay, let's move to that final pillar. Political resolve and global alignments. This complex rivalry feeds into what the sources often call Chanakya diplomacy,
Ah, yes, relentless strategic autonomy. The balancing act.
which means juggling different, sometimes opposing groups, like BRICS and the QUAD.
That's the core of it. Active participation in BRICS, which is now BRICS, plus of course, with new members, while also deepening commitments to the Quad alliance of the US, Japan, and Australia.
Okay, let's clarify for the listener. BRICS plus QUAD, different goals, different partners. What's the key difference in India's role in each?
It really comes down to function and audience. Within BRICS plus LO, India uses platforms like the New Development Bank, NDB, to advocate for fair development finance for the Global South.
Showing they aren't just aligning with the West.
Exactly. It underscores their strategic autonomy. It counters that narrative sometimes heard in the West that India is just becoming a U.S. sub-imperialist in an anti-China coalition.
And they back this up with specific diplomatic moves.
Oh, very targeted ones, like the source mentioning the alignment with Bolivia specifically for lithium supplies.
Ah, diversifying critical mineral sources away from China.
Precisely. A tangible example of multi-alignment serving direct economic and strategic interests, independent of Western ties.
Then on the other side, there's the QA. That relationship is deepening.
Significantly. It's framed much more explicitly as a unified front in the Indo-Pacific, pushing back against China's assertiveness, South China Sea, Taiwan Strait tensions, etc.
And the U.S. clearly sees India as critical in this.
Absolutely vital. But India remembers history. Things like the Trump administration's brief pivot towards Pakistan serve as reminders that relying too heavily on any one partner is risky.
The strategic autonomy isn't just a policy choice, it's almost ingrained.
It feels like a default setting, yeah, based on past experience.
Okay, we've covered the economy, the military buildup, the diplomacy. Let's synthesize. What's the ultimate driver behind this whole elephant's gambit?
I think it boils down to this. India fundamentally views China as its primary long-term existential rival.
Okay.
They want to reclaim influence in South Asia. Look at their renewed ties with Afghanistan, for example. But, and this is crucial, they need to avoid a full-blown military conflict
Why?
because that would derail the economic growth they absolutely need to solve that internal youth bulge challenge we talked about. So it's all about gaining time and strategic space.
Avoiding confrontation while still pushing back? That sounds like a recipe for constant friction. Where are the main flashpoints right now?
They're pretty clear. Along that fortified LAC, definitely. The increased naval jostling and surveillance in the South China Sea. And perhaps most concerningly, these proxy dynamics.
Like China arming Pakistan.
Exactly. Which then prompts India to consider its own moves, like potentially selling advanced weapons to China's neighbors, like Vietnam or the Philippines. It creates instability cycles.
So genuine rapprochement seems unlikely anytime soon.
The sources suggest the limits are pretty firm, rooted in basic competition for resources, markets, and regional influence.
Which brings us back to that big question, framing in the source material. Is India the counterbalance the U.S. is hoping for?
Washington certainly seems to hope so. They need a scalar, economically and militarily, to balance Beijing.
And what's the verdict from the analysis? Can India be that scalar?
Well, it's complicated, as always. On the one hand, the progress is real. Defense indigenization is moving forward. The diplomacy is sophisticated. India is positioning itself as a serious balancer.
What?
But critics raise valid points. Does multi-alignment ultimately dilute their focus and influence? Trying to be friends with everyone, or at least strategically engage with everyone, can leave you exposed.
And what's seen as the biggest internal risk? The thing that could really derail this whole strategy?
I think the biggest danger is if India remains purely reactive, just responding to China's moves rather than proactively shaping events. And that depends heavily on whether those internal reforms, the supply chain fixes, the PLI schemes actually delivering, keep pace with the diplomacy.
The domestic engine has to power the foreign policy ambitions.
Absolutely. The momentum has to come from within.
So for you, the listener, the takeaway is this. India is making these huge, deliberate, elephantine steps. They are fundamentally reshaping the strategic landscape in Asia.
Yeah, this gambit is underway. It could lead to some kind of checkmate, maybe a long stalemate, but either way, things are changing because of India's assertive pivot.
It's definitely a long game we'll be watching closely.
For sure. And maybe here's a final thought for you to mull over. We know China often uses tactics aimed at limiting India's competitiveness, like boosting Southeast Asian economies as alternatives.
Right.
So how truly effective can India's global diplomatic efforts be? If that huge domestic challenge, the youth bulge and the need for mass employment, isn't really solved by achieving massive, sustained manufacturing scale at home, can the diplomacy outrun the domestic pressure?
That really underscores the immense stakes riding on India's economic transformation. A lot to think about. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into India's strategic gambit.
And hey, if you enjoyed this deep dive, please do consider liking and subscribing wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss our future explorations into fascinating topics.
That helps us out a lot.
You can also find the latest articles, full transcripts of our discussions, links to partner products we sometimes mention, and more over at www.dansplain.xyz.
Yep, check it out.
We'll catch you next time.